I stood in my kitchen watching 3 kids doing cannonballs into my pool through the window, and I had absolutely no idea who they were. This was the 4th time this week I had come home from work to find random neighborhood children treating my backyard like a public water park. My name is James Kingsley, and I had moved into this planned community in Scottsdale, Arizona just 3 months ago, thinking I was buying into a peaceful retirement dream. Instead, I got a homeowners association that seemed to think my property was community property. The first time it happened, I thought maybe I was mistaken. Maybe these were kids from the previous owner's family who didn't get the memo about the sale. I went outside and politely asked them to leave, and they scattered like startled birds, grabbing their towels and flip-flops and racing through my back gate. But then, it happened again 2 days later. Different kids this time, splashing around without a care in the world while I was supposedly at my dentist appointment that ran short. I tried talking to my neighbors about it. The woman next door, a pleasant enough lady named Patricia, just shrugged and said that in Desert Bloom Estates, people tended to share things. That should have been my first red flag. I didn't buy a house with a pool to share it with every kid in a 5-block radius. I bought it because I wanted to swim laps in the morning and relax in the evening with a book and a cold drink, not run a daycare center. The HOA president, a woman named Barbara Whitmore, had actually come by during my 2nd week in the neighborhood with a fruit basket and a binder full of rules. She was exactly what you would picture when someone says HOA president. Blonde highlights, athleisure, where that probably cost more than my monthly utilities, and that specific tone of voice that suggested she was used to getting her way. She spent 45 minutes explaining the regulations about mailbox colors, lawn maintenance schedules, and approved window treatments. Not once did she mention that neighborhood children might treat my pool like a community amenity. When I called her about the pool situation after the 2nd incident, she seemed confused by my concern. "Well, James, we're a community here. The children need somewhere to cool off in the summer heat. It's over 100 degrees most days." "They can cool off in their own pools," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "or at the community center. Doesn't this HOA have a community pool?" "Oh, that's been closed for renovation since April," Barbara said breezily. "Should be done by September. It was June." I was supposed to just accept random children in my pool for 3 more months. "Barbara, I have liability issues here. If one of these kids gets hurt in my pool, I'm responsible. I didn't give anyone permission to use it." "I'm sure their parents know where they are," she said. "This is a safe neighborhood, James. We all look out for each other. Maybe you just need to adjust your expectations about community living." That conversation ended with me being more frustrated than when it started. I put a lock on my back gate, thinking that would solve the problem. It did, for exactly 2 days. Then I came home to find the lock had been cut, and there were 5 kids in my pool this time, including a couple of teenagers who had brought pool floats and a Bluetooth speaker blasting music I was too old to recognize. I chased them out, replaced the lock with a heavier-duty one, and installed a camera pointing at the back gate. The next day, I reviewed the footage and watched a woman I didn't recognize walk up to my gate with bolt cutters at 2 in the afternoon, snip the lock like it was made of paper, and then wave a group of children through. She looked directly at the camera and didn't seem to care at all that she was being recorded. That evening, I printed a still frame from the video and went door to door trying to find out who she was. The 3rd house I tried, a man named Derek told me that was Michelle Patterson, and she lived 4 streets over. "She's on the HOA board," he added. "Pretty active in the community." "She cut my lock and let kids into my pool without permission," I said, showing him the picture. Derek winced. Yeah, that sounds like Michelle. She thinks because she's on the board, she can make decisions for everyone. Good luck with that. I went to Michelle's house immediately. It was a large 2-story with impeccable landscaping and a 3-car garage. When she answered the door, she recognized me instantly. "Oh, you're the new guy on Sagaro Lane," she said. "I'm Michelle. Welcome to the neighborhood. You cut my lock and let children into my pool without my permission," I said, skipping any pleasantries. "The children needed somewhere to swim," she replied, as if this explained everything. "The community pool is closed and it's dangerous for kids to be cooped up inside during summer. We're doing you a favor, really. An unused pool is a wasted resource." I stared at her, trying to process the logic. It's my pool on my property that I pay for the maintenance and chemicals and insurance for. You're part of a community now, James. We share resources here. It's what makes Desert Bloom Estates so special. She smiled like she was explaining something to a slow child. "Maybe if you spent less time worrying about rules and more time embracing the community spirit, you'd be happier here. If anyone gets hurt in my pool, I'm liable. Do you understand that? I could lose everything." "Oh, don't be so dramatic. Nothing's going to happen. Kids have been swimming in neighborhood pools for decades. You need to relax." She actually closed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, genuinely shocked. Then I called the police non-emergency line and filed a report about the destruction of property. The officer who took my statement sounded sympathetic, but not particularly hopeful. "We can document it, Mr. Kingsley. But unless you want to press charges for criminal trespassing and destruction of property, there's not much we can do. It's really a civil matter between you and your neighbors." I asked what pressing charges would involve. He explained it would mean going to court, and given that it was neighborhood kids and the damages were minimal, the judge might just dismiss it or give a small fine. It would cost me more in time and legal fees than it was worth. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the sounds of the desert through my open window and wondered what I had gotten myself into. I had sold my condo in Seattle to move here, thinking the warm weather and slower pace would be good for me after 30 years in software development. I had enough saved to retire comfortably, and I just wanted peace and quiet. Instead, I had an HOA that apparently believed in forced communism when it came to my private property. The next morning, I went to the hardware store and bought the most heavy-duty chain and lock I could find, the kind they use for securing motorcycles. I also bought motion sensor lights and installed them around the pool area. If kids were going to break in, at least I'd have bright lights announcing their presence. For 3 days, it worked. No kids in the pool. The new lock held. Then on the 4th day, I came home to find the chain had been cut again, and this time there was a note rubber banded to my front door. It was from Barbara Whitmore, written on official HOA letterhead. "Dear James, it has come to our attention that you are being uncooperative with community sharing initiatives. Please be advised that Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws states that homeowners must maintain a spirit of neighborly cooperation and community engagement. Refusing to allow community members access to reasonable shared resources may be considered a violation of this bylaw. Please reconsider your stance for the good of the community. Regards, Barbara Whitmore, HOA President." I read it 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. I dug out my copy of the HOA bylaws and found Section 12, Paragraph 4. It was incredibly vague, talking about fostering positive community relationships and contributing to the overall well-being of Desert Bloom Estates. There was nothing specific about pools or sharing property. It was the kind of language that could mean anything or nothing, depending on who was interpreting it. I needed legal advice. I called a real estate attorney named Robert Chen, whose name I found through a quick online search. His receptionist scheduled me for the following afternoon. In the meantime, I replaced the lock again and sent a certified letter to Barbara Whitmore explaining that I did not consent to anyone using my pool, that I considered any further destruction of my property or trespassing to be harassment, and that I would pursue legal action if it continued. The meeting with Robert Chen was enlightening and depressing in equal measure. He was a sharp-dressed man in his 50s with a practical demeanor. He read through my HOA bylaws while I explained the situation. "This is tricky," he finally said. "The bylaw they're citing is essentially meaningless. No judge would interpret neighborly cooperation to mean you have to let people use your pool. However, HOAs have a lot of power, and they can make your life difficult in other ways. They can fine you for minor violations, they can put liens on your property for unpaid fines, and they can generally be a nightmare to deal with. So what do? Document everything. Keep records of every trespass, every cut lock, every conversation. Send them a formal cease and desist letter. I can draft one for you. If they continue, you file for a restraining order and possibly sue for harassment and property damage. But I'll be honest with you, James, this could get expensive and time-consuming. What about just building a fence, making the pool area more secure? You'd need HOA approval for any fence over a certain height, and based on what you're telling me, I doubt they'd approve it. You could try." I left his office feeling defeated. I paid him for the consultation and the cease and desist letter he would draft, and I drove home wondering if I should just sell the house and cut my losses. But I had just bought it. I had moved my entire life here. I wasn't going to be driven out by entitled neighbors and an overreaching HOA. That evening, I was sitting on my back patio, staring at the pool and trying to think of solutions when I heard voices on the other side of my fence. Young voices talking about whether they should go in. "Is the mean guy home?" one kid asked. "I don't know. His car is here. My mom said we can swim here if we want. She said it's allowed." I stood up and walked to the gate. 3 kids, probably between 8 and 10 years old, were standing there with towels and pool toys. They looked startled when I appeared. "Who told you that you could swim here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "My mom," said one of the boys. "She's on the HOA board." "What's your name?" "Tyler." "Tyler, this is my pool. Your mom doesn't have the right to tell you that you can use it. You need to go home." "But there's nowhere else to swim," a girl whined. "It's so hot." "That's not my problem. You need to leave, and you need to tell your parents that you can't come here anymore." They left, dragging their feet and muttering. I felt like the villain in a children's movie, but I also felt like I was standing up for basic property rights. 10 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I knew before I answered it that this wasn't going to be pleasant. A woman in her early 40s stood on my porch, arms crossed, face flushed with anger. "Are you James Kingsley?" "Yes." "I'm Denise Patterson, Tyler's mother and HOA board member." "Did you just yell at my son?" "I didn't yell at anyone. I told him and his friends that they couldn't swim in my pool. They're children. It's 103 degrees. They need somewhere to cool off. They can cool off at their own homes or at a public pool. This is my property. This is a community, and in communities we share. That's how civilization works. You're being selfish and, frankly, kind of cruel to children." I took a deep breath. "Mrs. Patterson, if one of those children drowns in my pool or gets injured, I'm the one who's liable. I'm the one who could face a lawsuit or criminal charges for negligence. I didn't give permission for them to be here, and I need you to respect that." You're being ridiculous. Nothing is going to happen. You don't know that, and it's not your decision to make. Please keep your son away from my property. I'm going to report this to the HOA. Your attitude is completely against the community values we uphold here. Report whatever you want, but if your son or any other child trespasses on my property again, I'm calling the police. She left in a huff, and I closed the door feeling shaky. I wasn't used to confrontation. I had spent most of my career in quiet offices, writing code and attending meetings. I didn't like conflict, but I also wasn't going to be bullied into giving up my rights. The next day, I received a notice from the HOA. I was being fined $200 for failure to maintain community standards and cooperation. The notice was signed by Barbara Whitmore and listed the complaint as refusing reasonable community resource sharing and displaying hostility toward residents. I called Robert Chen immediately. He told me not to pay the fine and that he would handle it. He sent the cease and desist letter to the HOA board and to Michelle Patterson and Denise Patterson specifically. The letter was firm and legal, making it clear that any further trespassing, property damage, or harassment would result in legal action. For one blessed week, there were no kids in my pool. I actually got to swim laps in the morning and enjoy my own backyard. I started to think maybe the legal letter had worked, that they had finally understood I was serious. Then I got home on a Thursday afternoon and found not 3 or 5 but about a dozen kids in my pool. They had pool toys, floats, and had apparently set up a full party. There were adults too, sitting in my patio chairs, drinking what looked like cocktails. Music was playing from a portable speaker. They had turned my backyard into a neighborhood social event. I stood there for a moment, genuinely speechless. Then I pulled out my phone and started recording. One of the women noticed me and waved cheerfully. "Oh, you're home. We were just taking advantage of this beautiful pool. I'm Sandra. I live on Mesquite Drive. Everyone needs to leave. Now." My voice came out harder than I expected. The cheerful atmosphere evaporated. The adults looked at each other uncomfortably. One man, broad-shouldered and sunburned, stood up. "Hey, man, we're just trying to have a nice afternoon. No need to be hostile. You're trespassing, all of you. I want everyone out of my yard in the next 60 seconds or I'm calling the police." "Jesus, what's your problem?" another woman said. "We're your neighbors. Neighbors don't break into each other's yards and throw parties without permission. Get out." Slowly, reluctantly, they gathered their things. The kids were crying. The adults were muttering angrily. I stood there recording everything until the last person filed out through my gate. Then I called the police and filed a formal trespassing complaint. This time, 2 officers came to take my statement. I showed them the video, the cut locks I had saved, the camera footage from previous incidents. They took notes and asked if I wanted to press charges. I said yes. They told me they would follow up and that I should consider getting a consultation with the county attorney's office. That evening, Barbara Whitmore showed up at my door with Michelle and Denise. The 3 of them stood there like an angry delegation. "James, we need to talk about your behavior," Barbara started. "No, we need to talk about yours. You've been organizing trespassing on my property. You've destroyed my locks multiple times. You threw a party in my backyard without permission. I've filed a police report. You called the police on your neighbors." Michelle looked genuinely shocked. "Over kids swimming, over repeated criminal trespassing and property damage." "Yes." "This is insane," Denise said. "You've completely lost perspective. I want all 3 of you off my porch. Any further communication should go through my attorney." I handed them each a card that Robert Chen had given me for exactly this purpose. "The HOA will make your life hell," Barbara said. "We have the power to fine you to put liens on your home. You won't be able to sell. You'll regret this. That sounds like harassment and threats. I'm recording this conversation, by the way. I held up my phone, which I had started recording when I saw them approaching. Please leave. They left, but not before Barbara turned and said, "You'll never be welcome in this community. You'll be completely ostracized." I closed the door and realized I was shaking. This had escalated so far beyond what I ever imagined. I poured myself a whiskey and sat in my living room, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake moving here. Over the next few days, I noticed the ostracism Barbara had promised. Neighbors who had previously waved or said hello now ignored me. Someone egged my car. My newspaper kept disappearing from my driveway. I received 3 more HOA violation notices for things like my trash cans being visible from the street for more than 2 hours after collection, and a small weed growing in my front yard landscaping. Each violation came with a fine. Robert Chen advised me not to pay any of the fines and assured me they wouldn't hold up if challenged. He was working on a larger strategy, he said. But in the meantime, I felt under siege. Then things took a turn. I was researching online solutions for pool security when I came across motion-activated sprinklers designed to deter animals from gardens and yards. They detected movement and shot out a burst of water. People used them to keep deer, cats, and other animals away from specific areas. I read through dozens of reviews and realized this might be exactly what I needed. I ordered 4 of them with express shipping. They arrived 2 days later, and I spent an evening installing them around the pool area. They were designed to cover specific zones, and I positioned them so that anyone approaching the pool from any direction would trigger them. The burst of water was harmless but surprising, and I figured it would be enough to discourage kids from coming in without my permission. I tested them by walking through the backyard, and they worked perfectly. Every time I crossed into the detection zone, a burst of water shot out with impressive force. It was actually kind of funny. I adjusted the sensitivity and coverage until I was satisfied, then armed the system before going to bed. The next day was Saturday. I was in my home office answering emails when I heard screaming from the backyard. High-pitched, terrified screaming. I rushed to the window and saw 4 kids soaking wet, scrambling over my fence in a panic. The motion sprinklers were doing exactly what they were designed to do, spraying water at anything that moved in their detection zones. I watched as the last kid tumbled over the fence and disappeared. The sprinklers went dormant again, waiting for their next trigger. I couldn't help but smile a little. It was a harmless solution that protected my property without hurting anyone. 20 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I expected angry parents, but I wasn't prepared for what I saw. A man and woman stood there, both looking embarrassed and uncomfortable. The woman was holding the hand of a girl, probably 9 years old, who was still damp and red-faced from crying. "Mr. Kingsley," the man said. "I'm David Morrison, and this is my wife, Rachel. This is our daughter, Emma." "Hello," I said cautiously. "We wanted to apologize," Rachel said quickly. "Emma and some of her friends came into your yard without permission. The sprinklers scared them pretty badly, and when we found out what happened, we realized we needed to come talk to you. This was not what I expected." "Oh, well, thank you for coming. We're new to the neighborhood too," David continued. "We moved in about 6 months ago. We were told by some of the other parents that the pools in the neighborhood were sort of communal during the summer while the community pool was being renovated. We didn't realize it wasn't true or that you hadn't agreed to it." Emma looked up at me with big, scared eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kingsley. I thought it was okay. I didn't mean to do something wrong." My heart softened a bit. The kid genuinely seemed to think she had permission. "It's okay, Emma. You're not in trouble, But you can't go in people's yards without asking first, okay? She nodded vigorously. I won't, I promise. Rachel looked relieved. We really are sorry. We should have verified before letting her go. We just trusted what the other parents said. Can I ask who told you the pools were communal? Barbara Whitmore, David said. She came by when we moved in with this whole welcome packet and told us that Desert Bloom Estates was all about community sharing. She specifically mentioned pools being available since the community pool was closed. Did she mention that the pool owners had to agree to this? No. She made it sound like it was just how things worked here. I felt my anger shifting away from the parents and back toward Barbara and the HOA board where it belonged. These people weren't being malicious. They had been misled. Look, I appreciate you coming to apologize. That takes a lot of integrity. But you should know that Barbara Whitmore doesn't speak for me or for my property. I didn't agree to any communal pool arrangement, and I've had to deal with constant trespassing, cut locks, and harassment because I've tried to enforce my property rights. David and Rachel exchanged a look. We've noticed the HOA here is pretty intense, David said. We've gotten fined twice for things that seemed really petty. Welcome to Desert Bloom Estates, I said dryly. We talked for a few more minutes. They asked about the sprinklers, and I explained they were motion-activated and completely harmless, just designed to deter unwanted visitors. Rachel actually laughed and said it was clever. Before they left, David gave me his phone number and said if I ever needed anything to call. We're going to talk to some of the other parents, Rachel said. I don't think most of them realize that Barbara has been lying about this. People just believed her because she's the HOA president. After they left, I felt better than I had in weeks. Finally, someone had approached this situation with reason and decency. But that good feeling didn't last long. Within hours, my doorbell was ringing again, and this time it was Barbara Whitmore flanked by Michelle and Denise, all three looking furious. You booby-trapped your yard, Barbara practically shrieked. Children were terrified. I installed motion-activated sprinklers. They're perfectly legal and harmless. You did it to hurt children. I did it to protect my property from trespassers. The kids shouldn't have been in my yard in the first place. This is psychological terrorism, Michelle said. Those kids are traumatized. Then their parents should teach them not to trespass. My attorney has already confirmed that motion-activated sprinklers are legal. They're sold at every hardware store in America. We're issuing you another fine, Barbara said. $500 for creating a hostile environment. I'm not paying any of your bogus fines. You can add them to the lawsuit my attorney is preparing. Lawsuit? Denise looked nervous for the first time. Yes, for harassment, property damage, and conspiracy to commit trespass. He's also looking into filing complaints with the state about your abuse of HOA authority. Apparently, there's a whole regulatory body that handles HOA misconduct. That was true. Robert Chen had explained that Arizona had specific laws governing HOA behavior, and that repeated, documented harassment could result in serious consequences for board members. He was building a case and had advised me to keep documenting everything. The three women left without another word, and I watched them walk down my driveway, heads together in urgent conversation. I had a feeling things were about to escalate even further. The next morning, I woke up to find that someone had spray-painted "selfish" across my garage door in red paint. I immediately called the police and filed a vandalism report. They sent an officer who took photos and asked if I had any idea who might have done it. I explained the ongoing conflict with the HOA, and he made detailed notes. This is getting out of hand, he said. Have you considered getting a restraining order? My attorney is working on it. You might want to speed that up. This kind of escalation can get dangerous. His words stayed with me as I spent the afternoon cleaning paint off my garage door. The spray paint had seeped into the texture of the door, and it was going to need professional repainting. I documented the damage and sent photos to Robert Chen. That evening, I got a call from David Morrison. "Hey, James, I wanted to give you a heads up. Rachel and I talked to about a dozen families in the neighborhood today about the pool situation. Most of them had no idea that you hadn't agreed to share your pool. Barbara told everyone it was a community arrangement. Seriously. Yeah, and people are pretty upset with her now. She basically lied to the whole neighborhood and made you look like the bad guy. We're planning to call a special HOA meeting to address it. Can you do that?" According to the bylaws, yes. If 15% of homeowners request a special meeting, the board has to hold one within 30 days. We've already got the signatures. This was an interesting development. What are you hoping to accomplish? At minimum, we want answers about why Barbara has been representing that pools are communal when owners haven't agreed. Some people are also talking about calling for a vote to remove her from the board. She's been pretty heavy-handed about a lot of things, and this pool situation was the last straw for several families. After we hung up, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I wasn't alone in this after all. Maybe Barbara had finally overreached. The special HOA meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, the motion sprinklers continued to do their job. I would occasionally hear them activate during the day and know that someone had tried to approach the pool. No one ever made it far enough to actually get in the water. I also started noticing that some neighbors were going out of their way to be friendly. People I had never met before would stop me on my evening walks and introduce themselves, often apologizing for the situation with the pool or expressing frustration with the HOA board. It turned out that a lot of people had grievances with Barbara Whitmore's leadership style, but had been afraid to speak up. Robert Chen filed for a restraining order against Barbara, Michelle, and Denise, citing the pattern of harassment, property damage, and threats. The hearing was scheduled for 2 days before the special HOA meeting. He also filed a civil lawsuit seeking damages for the property damage and emotional distress, which he said would put additional pressure on them. The restraining order hearing was held in a Maricopa County courthouse on a hot Wednesday morning. I sat with Robert while Barbara, Michelle, and Denise sat on the other side of the courtroom with their own attorney, a nervous-looking man who kept adjusting his tie. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Patricia Morales, reviewed the evidence Robert had compiled. Photos of cut locks, video footage of trespassing, the spray-painted garage door, copies of threatening messages and bogus HOA fines, and witness statements from neighbors who had seen the harassment. Barbara's attorney argued that this was just a neighborhood dispute and that my client was being oversensitive. "Your Honor, homeowners association disagreements happen all the time. This doesn't rise to the level of requiring a restraining order." Judge Morales looked at him over her glasses. "Counselor, the evidence shows repeated property damage, organized trespassing, and escalating vandalism. This goes well beyond a simple disagreement. The question is whether the respondents pose a continuing threat to the petitioner." She called Barbara to the stand. Under oath, Barbara tried to maintain that she had just been trying to foster community spirit and that I was being uncooperative and hostile. "Mrs. Whitmore," Judge Morales said, "did you at any point receive clear communication from Mr. Kingsley that he did not consent to people using his pool?" "Well, yes. And after receiving that communication, did you continue to organize or encourage people to use his pool? It's complicated. The community pool was closed, and yes or no, Mrs. Whitmore?" Barbara's face reddened. I may have mentioned to people that pools in the neighborhood were available. After being told explicitly that Mr. Kingsley's pool was not available, I thought he would come around. Judge Morales made a note. Did you personally cut locks on Mr. Kingsley's gate? That was Michelle, not me. Michelle shot Barbara a furious look. The judge called Michelle to the stand next. Michelle tried to justify the lock cutting by saying the children needed somewhere safe to swim and that I was being unreasonable. Miss Patterson, did you understand that cutting someone's lock and entering their property without permission is trespassing and destruction of property? I'm on the HOA board. I thought I had authority to make decisions about community resources. A homeowner's private pool is not a community resource unless the homeowner agrees to make it one. Did Mr. Kingsley agree? No, but thank you. The hearing lasted about 2 hours. By the end, Judge Morales had heard enough. She granted a temporary restraining order requiring Barbara, Michelle, and Denise to stay at least 100 yards away from me and my property. She also ordered them to have no contact with me directly or indirectly. The order would remain in effect pending a full hearing in 60 days, at which point it could be made permanent. I'm also referring this matter to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office for review of possible criminal charges, Judge Morales added. The evidence of deliberate property damage and organized trespassing is concerning. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt vindicated but also exhausted. This had consumed months of my life and thousands of dollars in legal fees. Robert assured me that we could recover the fees in the civil suit, but it didn't change how draining the whole experience had been. The special HOA meeting was held that Saturday evening in the community center. I arrived early and was surprised to see the room filling up quickly. It seemed like half the neighborhood had shown up. David and Rachel Morrison were there, along with dozens of other residents I recognized from around the neighborhood. Barbara, Michelle, and Denise sat at the front table, looking uncomfortable. They had to stay 100 yards away from me specifically, but they couldn't avoid the meeting entirely without abandoning their board positions. A homeowner named Gregory Stafford, who lived on Palo Verde Drive, had volunteered to moderate the meeting. He called it to order and explained that the purpose was to address concerns about HOA board conduct, specifically regarding the pool situation and other complaints that had emerged in recent weeks. One by one, homeowners stood up and shared their experiences. A man named Richard talked about being fined $300 because his garage door was a slightly different shade of beige than approved, even though it was the original door installed by the builder. A woman named Natasha described being threatened with liens because she planted native desert flowers instead of the approved grass lawn, even though native plants used less water and were better for the environment. When it came time to discuss the pool situation, David Morrison stood up and explained how he and other parents had been told by Barbara that pools were communal resources during the community pool renovation. She never mentioned that homeowners like James Kingsley had to actually agree to this. She presented it as established policy. That's why so many kids ended up in his pool. Their parents thought it was allowed. Barbara tried to defend herself, saying she was just trying to help the children and build community. I never meant for things to escalate this way. I thought James would be more cooperative once he understood the community values here. But he explicitly told you no multiple times, Rachel Morrison said, standing up. He told you it was a liability issue and that he didn't consent. And instead of respecting that, you organized people to cut his locks and trespass. That's not community building. That's harassment. The room erupted in agreement. Barbara looked stricken. Michelle tried to speak up in her defense, but people shouted her down. Gregory called for order. I think we need to address whether the current board has lost the confidence of the community. I'm proposing a vote of no confidence in Barbara Whitmore as HOA president. The motion was seconded immediately. After some discussion about procedure, Gregory called for a vote. Homeowners voted by show of hands since this was technically an emergency measure. The result was overwhelming. 73 homeowners voted for the no confidence measure, 11 voted against, and 6 abstained. Barbara stood up, her face pale. This is outrageous. I've dedicated years to this community. And you've also abused your authority, someone called out. It's time for new leadership. A similar vote of no confidence was held for Michelle and Denise. Both passed, though, with slightly smaller margins. By the end of the meeting, the entire HOA board had been effectively removed, and an interim board was appointed with the mandate to organize proper elections within 60 days. As I left the community center that night, several people stopped me to apologize or express support. One elderly man named Frank shook my hand and said, "You did the right thing standing up to them. Barbara's been a tyrant for years, but no one had the guts to challenge her. Thank you." Over the following weeks, things slowly returned to normal. The motion sprinklers remained in place, but I never heard them activate during the day anymore. Kids had learned that my pool was off limits, and parents were respecting that boundary. The county attorney's office did decide to file charges against Michelle Patterson for criminal trespassing and destruction of property. She ended up pleading guilty to a misdemeanor and was sentenced to community service and restitution for the locks she had destroyed. Barbara and Denise weren't charged criminally, but the civil lawsuit was moving forward. Robert Chen negotiated a settlement on my behalf. Barbara, Michelle, and Denise jointly agreed to pay $15,000 to cover my legal fees, the cost of repainting my garage door, replacing the locks, and compensation for the harassment I had endured. They also signed an agreement that they would never serve on the Desert Bloom Estates HOA board again, and would not interfere with my property in any way. The permanent restraining order hearing ended up being unnecessary, since the settlement included a mutual non-contact agreement. I didn't want to see them any more than they wanted to see me. The new HOA board, elected in late August, was much more reasonable. They sent out a clear communication to all residents stating that private pools were exactly that, private. Any sharing arrangements needed to be made voluntarily between neighbors, and no one should assume they had access to someone else's property without explicit permission. They also accelerated the community pool renovation by hiring a different contractor, and it reopened in early September, giving the kids somewhere legitimate to swim. I started to feel like I actually lived in a community rather than a war zone. Neighbors who had previously been cold to me began to warm up again, especially once they understood the full story of what had happened. I learned that Barbara had been spreading rumors about me being antisocial and hostile to children, which had poisoned a lot of people's opinions. Once the truth came out, those opinions shifted. David and Rachel Morrison became genuine friends. Our families had dinner together regularly, and Emma, their daughter, would sometimes come over to ask if she could swim in my pool. I always appreciated that she asked first, and I usually said yes. It was the asking that mattered, the respect for boundaries. One Saturday afternoon in October, when the heat had finally broken and the temperature was a pleasant 85 degrees, I was swimming laps when David and Rachel came through the back gate. They had brought beer and sandwiches, and we sat on the patio talking about everything from work to politics to the best hiking trails around Scottsdale. "You know," David said, "this whole thing could have been avoided if Barbara had just respected your property rights from the beginning." "Could have," Should have, I said. But I think it needed to happen. This neighborhood needed a wake-up call about what community actually means. It's not about forcing people to share or ignoring boundaries. It's about respecting each other and cooperating voluntarily. Philosophical James, Rachel teased. But you're right. The new board is so much better. They actually listen to concerns instead of just dictating what we should do. The following month, I attended my first HOA meeting since the special session. The new president, a software engineer named Linda Foster who lived 2 streets over, ran the meeting efficiently and democratically. Issues were discussed, voted on, and resolved without drama. It was refreshing. During the open comment period, I stood up and addressed the group. I just wanted to thank everyone for supporting the changes we've made in leadership. I know my situation with the pool became a flashpoint, but it really represented larger issues about how the HOA was being run. I'm grateful that we were able to resolve things and move forward. People applauded, and afterward, several residents came up to chat with me about other ideas for improving the community. It felt like being part of something positive instead of being constantly under attack. The motion sprinklers stayed up through the winter, though I adjusted them to be less sensitive since kids weren't trying to sneak into the pool anymore. They became something of a neighborhood legend. Kids would dare each other to run through the detection zone, shrieking with laughter when they got sprayed. One afternoon, I was working in my garage when a woman I didn't recognize approached. She introduced herself as Vanessa, and she had just moved into the neighborhood. I heard about everything that happened with the previous HOA board, she said. I actually almost didn't buy here because of the reviews online about how difficult the HOA was. But then, I saw that there had been a complete board turnover, and people were saying things had improved dramatically. I wanted to thank you for standing up to them. I just wanted to swim in my own pool, I said with a laugh, but I'm glad it led to positive changes. Well, it did. This seems like a really nice community now. As she walked away, I reflected on how strange the past several months had been. I had moved to Scottsdale looking for peace and retirement, and instead, I had gotten embroiled in a conflict that required lawyers, restraining orders, and civil litigation. But in the end, things had worked out better than I could have hoped. The HOA was functional and reasonable. The community actually felt like a community, and I could swim in my own pool without worrying about liability or trespassers. The holidays came, and the neighborhood organized a winter festival in the park. The new HOA board had put it together, and it featured food trucks, a small carnival, and holiday decorations. I volunteered to help with setup, and it was genuinely enjoyable working alongside neighbors who now felt like actual friends. Emma Morrison came running up to me at one point, her face painted like a reindeer. "Mr. Kingsley, are you having fun?" "I am, Emma. How about you? This is the best. Hey, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you going to keep the sprinklers up forever?" "Probably not forever. But for now, yeah." "That's good. My friends and I like playing in them sometimes. They're fun now that we're not scared." She ran off to rejoin her friends, and I smiled. It was funny how something I had installed out of desperation and frustration had become a neighborhood attraction. As winter turned to spring, the community pool was operating smoothly, and there were no more incidents of trespassing or property damage. Barbara Whitmore had moved away, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine. She had sold her house and left Arizona entirely. Michelle and Denise still lived in the neighborhood, but kept to themselves, and were rarely seen at community events. My daily routine had returned to what I had originally envisioned when I bought the house. I swam laps every morning, worked on consulting projects in my home office, and spent evenings reading or socializing with neighbors. The stress and anxiety that had dominated those first few months were gone. One evening in April, I was sitting by the pool with a book when my phone rang. It was Robert Chen. "James, I wanted to give you an update. Michelle Patterson has completed her community service and all the restitution payments have been made. The case is officially closed." "That's good to hear." "It is. You handled this whole situation really well, by the way." A lot of people would have either given up or escalated things in unproductive ways. You stood your ground, documented everything, and let the legal system work. That's the right approach. I had a good attorney. I appreciate that. But seriously, you should feel proud of how you handled this. You not only protected your own rights, but you helped expose a dysfunctional HOA board and made things better for everyone in your community. After we hung up, I sat there thinking about his words. I did feel proud, actually. I had stood up for myself in a situation where it would have been easier to just give in. And while it had been stressful and expensive and exhausting, it had been worth it. The following weekend, I hosted a pool party. I invited David and Rachel, Linda Foster and her husband, and about a dozen other neighbors who had become friends. Everyone brought food and drinks, and we spent the afternoon swimming, talking, and laughing. Kids played Marco Polo in the pool while adults relaxed on the patio. At one point, Linda raised her beer bottle. "I want to propose a toast to James, who reminded all of us that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it." Everyone cheered and clinked their drinks together. I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. This was what community was supposed to feel like. Not forced sharing or trampled boundaries, but genuine connection built on mutual respect. As the sun set and the party wound down, I stood at the edge of my pool, looking out at the desert landscape beyond my fence. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the temperature was finally dropping to something comfortable. I could hear crickets chirping, and the distant sound of kids playing in their own yards. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from that first shocking afternoon when I came home to find strangers in my pool, through the escalating conflict with Barbara and the HOA board, to the legal battles and community upheaval, and finally, to this moment of peace and belonging. It hadn't been the retirement I planned, but it had taught me things about myself I hadn't known. I was braver than I thought, more resilient, more capable of standing up for myself and what was right. The motion sprinklers sat dormant in the corners of my yard, ready to activate if needed but rarely called upon anymore. They had served their purpose, not just as a deterrent but as a symbol that I would protect what was mine without apology. As the last guests left and I locked the gate behind them, I smiled. My pool was mine again, but I was sharing it on my terms with people I chose, building relationships based on mutual respect rather than entitlement. That made all the difference in the world. The next morning, I woke early and went out for my usual swim. The water was perfectly clear, the chemicals balanced just right. I dove in and began my laps, feeling my muscles warm up and my mind clear. This was exactly what I had wanted when I moved here. Peace, solitude when I needed it, and community when I chose it. Later that day, Emma knocked on my door holding a hand-drawn card. It showed a stick figure swimming in a pool with the sun shining overhead. "Thank you for teaching me to always ask permission," she had written in careful letters. "You're a good neighbor." I thanked her and put the card on my refrigerator. It stayed there for months, a reminder that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, creates ripples that spread further than you expect. The HOA continued to function smoothly under Linda's leadership. They established clearer guidelines about property rights and community standards, making sure there was no ambiguity about what was private and what was shared. They also created better channels for resolving disputes before they escalated to legal action. I even joined a committee focused on community events, helping to plan things like the summer concert series and the fall festival. It felt good to contribute positively after months of conflict. By the time summer rolled around again, the 1-year anniversary of my move to Desert Bloom Estates, I could hardly recognize my life compared to that first chaotic summer. I had transformed from an outsider being harassed by an overreaching HOA into an active, respected member of the community. The motion sprinklers continued to serve as both protection and entertainment. I had fine-tuned them so that they wouldn't activate for small animals or birds, only for human-sized movement. Occasionally, a teenager would dare their friends to run through the detection zone, and I would watch from my window as they got soaked, laughing the whole time. I never removed them, though I didn't really need them anymore. They had become part of the property's personality, and honestly, I had grown fond of them. They represented my refusal to be pushed around, my willingness to find creative solutions, and ultimately, the catalyst that helped transform an entire community. One afternoon in July, I was replacing the batteries in the sprinklers when an older gentleman I hadn't met before walked up. He introduced himself as Edward, a retired lawyer who had just moved to the neighborhood from Chicago. "I heard about your battle with the previous HOA board," he said. "I'm impressed. Most people don't have the fortitude to stand up to that kind of pressure. I didn't really have a choice. I wasn't going to let them bully me off my own property. Well, you did everyone here a favor. I've been reviewing the HOA bylaws and financial records as part of my due diligence before buying, and the previous board was engaging in some questionable practices beyond just the pool situation. The new board is much more by the book." We talked for a while about HOA governance and property rights. Edward had spent part of his career dealing with real estate law, and he appreciated the nuances of the case. Before he left, he said, "If you ever need legal advice again, let me know. First consultation is always free for a neighbor." I thanked him and reflected on how much the neighborhood had changed in just a year. People were looking out for each other in healthy ways now, not in the invasive, boundary-crossing ways that Barbara had promoted. That evening, I sat by my pool as the sun set, a cold drink in hand and a good book on my lap. The water sparkled in the fading light, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear children laughing in their own yards. The heat of the day was giving way to the cool evening breeze that made Arizona summers bearable. I thought about everything that had happened and realized I wouldn't change any of it. Yes, it had been stressful and difficult. Yes, it had cost time and money and emotional energy. But it had also taught me who I was and what I was willing to fight for. It had shown me that standing up for your rights, even when everyone around you says you're wrong, is sometimes the most important thing you can do. The motion sprinklers sat silently in the corners of my yard, vigilant guardians that had scared away unwanted visitors and helped me reclaim my peace. They were more than just devices now. They were symbols of the journey I had been on and the community we had all built together. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear in the desert sky, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This was home. Not because it was perfect or because everything had been easy, but because I had fought for it, earned my place here, and helped make it better for everyone. The kids learned to respect boundaries. The parents learned that community doesn't mean ignoring property rights. The HOA learned that leadership means serving the community, not controlling it. And I learned that retirement doesn't mean avoiding conflict. Sometimes it means standing up for what matters and creating the life you want, rather than accepting what others try to impose on you. My pool was still there, crystal clear and perfectly maintained, waiting for my morning laps and occasional gatherings with friends I chose to invite. The motion sprinklers were still there too, ready to activate if needed but mostly dormant now, unnecessary but irreplaceable. Everything had come full circle. From those first shocking days of finding strangers in my pool to the eventual transformation of the entire community, it had been quite a journey. And as I finished my drink and headed inside for the night, I knew that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, living exactly the life I had fought to protect. The story of the HOA kids who kept swimming in my pool, the motion sprinklers that scared them, and the parents who came to apologize had become neighborhood legend. New residents heard about it when they moved in, usually accompanied by assurances that things were different now, better now. The story served as a cautionary tale about the importance of respecting boundaries, and as a reminder that one person standing up for what's right can change everything. And that pool, the source of so much conflict and ultimately so much positive change, continued to sparkle in the Arizona sun, a private oasis that I shared on my own terms with people I genuinely cared about. That's how it should have been from the beginning, and that's how it would remain for as long as I lived in Desert Bloom Estates. The journey had been unexpected and challenging, but standing by my pool on that warm summer evening, surrounded by the life I had built and the community we had all improved together, I realized it had all been worth it. Every confrontation, every legal document, every moment of doubt had led to this peaceful evening and the countless peaceful evenings to come. I was James Kingsley, homeowner, neighbor, community member, and the guy who installed motion sprinklers to protect his pool. And I was finally, completely at home,